Welcome into the Football Guys Dynasty Show. It is me, as always, Jagger May. And then we have Jeff Bell, our Dynasty captain. And then we have a guest that I'm super excited about. We have Ryan Heath over at Fantasy Points. Fantasy Points is the gold mine of data. They are like over there, they're your favorite analysts because like, not gonna lie, guys, you guys have pricey data, but it's like worth it because all that stuff that you have. And I'm so happy that I still have logins from previous companies. And I shouldn't say that on air, so we'll just jump into it. We are talking about running back tiers. And like I said, guys, we're getting close. We're in training camp right now, so we are just going back through and making adjustments because we have seen rookies catch passes against scout teams. So naturally, we have to make some sweeping assumptions. We'll jump right into it. In the tier one, we have Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, and Jahmyr Gibbs. No real shockers there. I intentionally left Christian McCaffrey out of this tier because intentionally, and we'll talk about that more in the next one. But guys, do we have any strong takes about all these guys? Like they're all good. If you like, basically, if you're doing a dynasty startup, these guys are going first, second. If you're getting a third round, Jahmyr Gibbs, that's good value. If you're wanting to compete that way, Jeff, we'll start with you. Do you have any strong opinions about this?
Well, we are going to continue our Football Guys training camp series, and so I've covered the Atlanta Falcons training camp for the last, I believe this is year 4 of covering them, and there were some initial comments when Zach Robinson was named the offensive coordinator that basically Bijan Robinson would be used like Christian McCaffrey. Now, reading some reports last night as I started to go through and compile, Tyler Algier is still getting first team work, and there might be a little bit more of a split than I think maybe we're hoping for and expecting. That being said, I think the offensive efficiency will be high enough, and this is just going to be a very high end offense relative to what we saw with Arthur Smith, that I think that Bijan Robinson will be able to power through that and still give us that top end running back one status. But I was really hoping that we were going to see true bell cow Bijan Robinson. And now, from the initial things that I've read, I'm a little bit weary that maybe we're not going to get all the way there.
Yeah, and that's kind of like Bijan is the RB1. I'm not debating if Bijan's going to be the RB1, but this goes back to I know some people said that we've jumped the shark, but I'm like, no, I think everything's just ranked appropriately now. Just running back in general, I just can't pay that price in that range because I would rather have any other positional value at that point. And again, it's Tyler Algier is he Bijan, and should he get the touches he got last year? No, but he still should get some. And like, he still should get some. And then on top of that, we want the passing volume because there's 2 other guys that are really good on that offense with Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Ryan, so I'll pivot to you. You've got the big brain energy. You're the wonderkin. You do all that math and stuff that I don't want to do. I could do it. I'm just lazy. Um, so, what are your thoughts about this tier? About the cost? Is this like a tier where you like to draft, or is this something that you may try to trade for, but you're not really going to take in a startup?
Yeah, I mean, so this tier I am pretty much staying away from outside of one situation, which is Breece Hall just kind of falling to me, maybe somewhere in the middle of the second round of a startup. I'm comfortable pushing the button on Breece Hall there. He is my dynasty RB1. But aside from that, yeah, it's a little bit hard to start off a startup just kind of going all in with a Bijan Robinson, with a Jahmyr Gibbs. It kind of just locks you into certain picks down the entire board. So it's a little tough. But I will say, I think if you're looking to take a running back really within the first 5 or 6 rounds of a dynasty startup, you should probably do it here, because I do think the top of the position is a lot better than the kind of the mid range, the low range of the RB1 tiers that we're going to get down into. So yeah, I'm cool with Hall personally, but am not going to get super bothered about drafting a running back at this spot.
Yeah, because I basically said that running backs like the new tight end, except it's still too expensive. Where essentially the top tier, the top couple of tiers, is the only thing that are really roster changing, and they're going to be the reasons that you're going to win. Of course, you're going to hit in the lower tiers, but those we can get into hit rates and all that a different show. But essentially, if you're not going to get like Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, I it doesn't really, or even I'll stop at like the top 7. If you're not getting out of the top 7, then like it doesn't really matter, and then it's kind of a blob, and I don't have any strong opinions. Spoiler alert. So we're just gonna move over to tier 2, and this wasn't me cheating. If you look at our spreadsheet, that doesn't look good for graphics, and I'm on the graphics team, but the way we sorted that, Christian McCaffrey kind of tiered out on his own. And then Ryan, you made a point that I always say, is that when you pick certain players, you've locked yourself into what you should do and what the optimal moves are. Christian McCaffrey is that ultimate player. If you're a drafted Christian McCaffrey and you're not trying to win, what are you doing? So I'm assuming you're really not going to draft Christian McCaffrey, but let's talk about trade value since we are at the beginning of the season. Startups aren't really happening. Dynasty, we're taking a step back. The numbers show it, but it's a redraft show. So let's say that you're making a trade. Is Christian McCaffrey someone that you may buy at this range?
So I, especially before the season, I'm very anti making win now types of trades in Dynasty. And the reason for that is because it's very hard to self scout your team and understand if this is a roster that will want to be or appreciate being pushed all in, especially before any of the games have been played. I mean, just think about like your redraft rosters where it looks really amazing right before week 1, yeah. And now it's week 4 or week 5, and you're like, oh man, like this team is a total dumpster fire. That absolutely happens to Dynasty rosters as well. They are not immune to this. So no, you do not want to be sending away your first round pick, assuming it's a late first, and then you wake up a month later, you've had a couple of key injuries, maybe to one of your quarterbacks, maybe to another running back, and it's like, oh, now Christian McCaffrey's going to die on my roster, and somebody just got what's likely to be an early first out of me. So I think that's like big mistake you super want to avoid in Dynasty. If you're going to make the push to go all in, which I would even just advise against generally, at least please wait until you're deeper into the season, until you're getting closer to that trade deadline. So yeah, there are very few circumstances where I'd be looking to trade for Christian McCaffrey this time of year.
Yeah. And specifically too, is like you said, it's the time of year. And then really the only scenario I'm trading for him is just like, I just slam dunked a rookie draft. And then when you slam dunk a rookie draft, that normally means you have a lot of value that you aren't starting, so you could consolidate that to other pieces. And even then, I'm pretty skeptical on buying a Christian McCaffrey. It's like, why would I buy Christian McCaffrey? Because the person who owns Christian McCaffrey probably loves him the most at this stage of his career, and I could just go buy Bijan, Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs. So, Jeff, before we move on to the housekeeping stuff, do you want to remind folks why you hate old people in football?
Well, I think it's just difficult with McCaffrey because who has him in your league? How many rebuilding teams right now have Christian McCaffrey? Because I think that when you really play it out and you kind of walk back his history, a lot of rebuilding type teams probably got off of him when we saw him healthy because of the concerns that he had that little bit of a window where he was hurt a couple of years there in Carolina. And so I think that those types of teams have moved off of him, and so he's probably sitting on a contender in your league already. The presence of Christian McCaffrey makes a team probably a contender, or in that person's mind, whoever's holding him thinks that they're a contender. So I think Ryan makes a great point. It's really hard to go in and buy him right now. And the other thing on top of that, stacking on top of it, you mentioned, Jag, that it's redraft season. All these drafts that are going on right now, people are taking Christian McCaffrey number 1 overall. And so you have an extra layer of value in some people's minds, I believe, when it comes to Dynasty, when in their redraft leagues, they're taking Christian McCaffrey number 1 overall. That boosts that value a little bit there. And so that's where I think you're exactly right, both of you. It's just hard to buy him and see a scenario right now. Whereas you play into the season and maybe that team that thinks they're a contender, just like Ryan said, all the pieces fall apart. Now all of a sudden they've just got Christian McCaffrey sitting there, and they're in their mind, the warning starts to go off in their head. Hey, I've got to get out on him while I can get max value for him. And sometimes those types of situations, when a seller is worried about getting max value, you can actually get max value as the buyer because they're extra motivated to feel like they need to make the trade right now.
Yeah. And to even piggyback off that even more, they either sold him at the end of last season. You guys know it. As soon as like week 17 ends, that trade block opens up and it's a fire sale. It's like, well, I've won. Who wants my garbage? Which, like, not garbage, but like, who wants my old dusty overpriced, antique? And that's kind of what Christian McCaffrey is at this point in dynasty terms. But like, you would have sold him in the draft. Like, if I had Christian McCaffrey, every pick, I'm like, offer, because like chances are, unless you're just a total doo-doo team, every team in that draft, if they have a first round pick or something, I could put a trade and I can get something that I feel like I get good value in return for Christian McCaffrey, especially in a draft as loaded as this one. Well, that's the old people discrimination aside. We'll get to the housekeeping, guys. Thank you for watching. If you made it this point, you're probably locked in. So go ahead and give us a like and subscribe. But more importantly, I have been hinting to you guys that we have some special stuff going on for you. We have finally finished our live draft sync. I've used it myself. It is in testing right now, and we're going to have that ready for you for the start of your redraft season. So that means if you use our tools like our Draft Dominator, you can use that live in draft. Like Joe Bryant read all of your emails, and he put the heat on our IT team. Not really. He's actually a really nice boss, but he gently asked our IT team and they delivered. So go over to footballguys.com/plans and get signed up. We are going to jump right into tier 3. This tier has Jonathan Taylor, Travis Etienne, Devon Achane. I call this tier maybe I'll buy. Jonathan Taylor is officially cheap enough now where I've clicked the button numerous times and I don't hate myself, even at the beginning of this year, because we've kind of talked about when you're going to buy these win now running backs and when's the optimal time to draft them, and what kind of build you can have. Jonathan Taylor, people have this idea that because Anthony Richardson's there, that not a single other person is ever going to get a touchdown in Indianapolis Colts history. Jeff, can you bring people to light on this and why that is silly?
Well, I mean, who's Jonathan Taylor's backup? Trey Sermon right now. Is Trey Sermon really going to cut into the workload for Jonathan Taylor? I think you're going to get a situation where 99% of the rush attempts, assuming both are healthy, are going to Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor, assuming the game is in the balance. And so that's where I think you kind of run down the list. I talked about Tyler Algier with Breece Hall. Maybe Braylon Allen might be there with Breece Hall a little bit. I talked about Tyler Algier with Bijan Robinson. I mean, certainly we know David Montgomery is sitting next to Jahmyr Gibbs. And so I don't have concerns about a second running back. And I think that there's room for Richardson to serve his role. Ideally, you want to use Richardson as that quarterback to be a difference maker, not to be a volume eater when you come kind of looking at offensive construction. And so coaches are always playing that, offensive coordinators always playing that game of, do we want to use the design quarterback run here, or do we want to make sure that we keep our quarterback healthy? And Richardson, coming off his rookie season, we've already seen health be a concern at one point. There was a story a couple days ago where they said that they're not going to limit his rushing, but at the same time, they've been talking very, very loudly from the Colts that Jonathan Taylor is basically get him in your fantasy league.
Yep. And I want to impress our new friend Ryan with some math. Usually people think that because there's a rushing quarterback that means the fantasy points dry up, but it's one of those things where having a rushing quarterback means more RPOs, and RPOs mean more efficiency. So you're not going to get the touches that you're going to get, in an offense with like Kirk Cousins or something like that. But what you are going to get is more high value touches, meaning that you're going to get more running backs averaging 5 yards a carry and stuff like that. So that's what I tell people. A lot of the things that scare them with volume or too many people. It just normally means more efficiency, and that is a higher indicator. Like the 49ers, I don't care about any stat that you give me about the 49ers because historically they continue to be one of the most efficient offenses as long as they have a quarterback that is just slightly better than Jimmy Garoppolo. Jonathan Taylor aside, I want to pivot to the other two in here. Travis Etienne, I find to be the biggest value in fantasy in general. I like to buy him. I like to draft him. He's going a little bit like Jonathan Taylor is where I feel pretty good clicking the button. Travis Etienne, I'm almost ecstatic. And depending on what my build is and if I have a tight end, he's someone I draft often. Ryan, why do you think his value is the way that it is? Have we won? Has the ZR Beers won? Is that what it is? And then finally, like, we're playing 4D chess and we can reap the benefits of Travis Etienne? What is it?
I think part of it with Etienne is it felt like the other shoe dropped at one point last year. So the first 7-8 weeks he comes out, Tank Bigsby fails spectacularly on everybody's television screens, and Etienne was a total and unquestioned every down bell cow, was a top 5 running back in fantasy. Things were going great. Then I believe it was in that London game, he kind of got banged up a little bit. They scaled back his workload some. And I mean, you can read into whatever different coach speak you would like in the offseason. I've certainly heard quotes from the Jags coaching staff that has suggested everything from Etienne will continue to be a bell cow to, oh, we want to kind of ease him up a little bit. We want to keep him healthy, to the stuff I know that's not true, which is that Tank Bigsby is raring for a second-year breakout. I know that part's not true. But I think people...
No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. I think just the case with Travis Etienne to not get insanely excited is we saw the bell cow scenario where his backup completely failed and he didn't really fully deliver on that top 5 running back rest of season potential when it happened. So yeah, I think Etienne is a fairly safe bet to be a top 10 workload at running back and to be a top 10 fantasy running back this year. But I can understand people not seeing like the top 3 type of upside, because it feels like if it was going to happen, it would have been last year.
Yep. And to throw it back to you before I go to Jeff, because I want to ask both of you about this, we finally got to what I think, with the exception of what we think about Christian McCaffrey, Devon Achane is the closest divisive player that we have. Where are you on this war? Do you just think that he's just good and just don't worry about it? Or do you worry about, you're like an injury bro that worries about that, or volume with Jaylen Wright? Because like, to me, I think at volume, at price, you should just take him. So
yeah, so once upon a time in like 2017, an exciting young rookie entered the league, was insanely efficient on all of his touches, completely outperformed all of his volume. That guy's name was Alvin Kamara. And yes, he was sharing a backfield with Mark Ingram his rookie season. His year 2 rolls around, the whole offseason after that, all we hear is Alvin Kamara is going to regress. He can't possibly continue being this efficient. And he sort of did. Yeah, he wasn't like 5 points above expectation anymore. He was 2 or 3 points above expectation in year 2. But his workload massively increased, because guess what? When young running backs come in and are that impressive as Alvin Kamara was, the team tends to want to give them the ball more in the following season. And guess what? Devon Achane, most efficient running back against his weighted opportunity of the past decade. More efficient than rookie season Kamara, more efficient than rookie season David Johnson, than all of the names. Devon Achane is going to see more volume this year. I don't care how it happens. They're talking about using him as like a slot receiver or whatever. Don't think that's really how it's going to turn out. But there are so many ways that Devon Achane gets even a 60% backfield opportunity share this year. Raheem Mostert was supposedly old and injured and washed like 3 years ago, and now he's scored 21 touchdowns, and we suddenly think he's this immovable pillar in the Dolphins backfield. I don't buy that for a second. I want to buy hyper talented players who are able to be the RB5 in fantasy points per game on like a 35% opportunity share as a rookie. That's insane. So yeah, give me all the Devon Achane. Aside from Hall, he's the other guy in this kind of top tier running backs that I'm wanting to draft at startups right now.
Yeah, and to pivot to Jeff, like you understand as much as anyone, I almost called him Mike Shanahan, but that's a Freudian slip. He runs that Shanahan offense, but Mike McDaniel, you watch his split zone schemes. Raheem Mostert wouldn't be a Raheem Mostert on any other team outside of the 49ers or Dolphins. And Jaylen Wright is more of an indicator of Raheem Mostert being 32 and then preparing for the future, and less about like Devon Achane. Because like again, these hyper efficient players will stay hyper efficient in an offense. Now let's say like Devon Achane had like a freak year and he was on the Bengals, that I would be like, pump the brake there, kid, because like the Bengals aren't that efficient. I've watched them run halfback slam like it's Madden in 2005, for years now. So I don't think that they're going to change that. So Jeff, is Devon Achane someone that you're targeting? Do you still like him at cost, or do you think that we finally reached the point that you could probably sell him and recoup value now?
I like him at cost. I like I think you made a great point there talking about Mike McDaniel, and really kind of the players that I think in my mind that I compare him to. Percy Harvin is a player that kind of comes to mind with him, and Jamal Charles is a player that kind of
That's
comes
a
to
deep
mind
cut.
with him. Yeah, and so that even those players have a good deal of weight and build on Achane, but I think that the game has changed so much dramatically, where these coaches are doing a great job of creating space offensively and putting defenses in conflict, and that plays very, very well into Achane's game. I saw some clips. I saw Sigmund Bloom, and I think it might have even been Fantasy Point Scott Barrett talking about how they create almost kick return plays for Achane within the offensive structure because of the movement and motion that they use before they give him the ball. And so that just the level of creativity, that's where I am with Achane. I just don't think you can think of him as a traditional running back. The other part of it too is, as we always see reasons for why zero RB is the correct way to build now. And what a lot of people like to bring up is running back by committee approaches. But if it's really that heavy in a running back by committee approach, then I want the player that is able to take the ball 75 yards for a touchdown on any given play and is able to give me a running back 1 week just off of one touch, one play. And Achane is that type of player. So as he steps in to the passing game, gets more volume in the passing game, as he has that big playability, which is a lot more rare than I think what people realize, because especially if you watch a lot of college football, we see big runs in college football all the time. To break off a big run in the NFL, like you're really moving, or the defense really has to be out of position for that to happen. And so the way that Achane has been able to do that in his rookie season, that's a special elite ability. And that's where I would be buying on him. It gets a little bit more difficult because a couple years ago, it's just the shift, how dramatic wide receiver values have shifted. And in I do a lot of best ball, and it's like if you don't get your wide receivers early, then you're kind of throwing some darts here or there. But I think even more in dynasty and startup leagues, where Achane is usually sitting, I'm still very wide receiver focused at that point. And so to pass up a wide receiver to grab Achane, that's a struggle for me. And that's where it's like I believe in the talent. I believe that it's going to be there for fantasy production. But at the same time, the way that I would want to build a roster is not making that investment in Achane at that point.
Yeah, and I agree with you, because it's the same thing. Like in these early rounds, I'm getting pass catchers and quarterbacks. And if you think about it, that's 5 rounds that I'm spending on 3 positions. Like I want a tight end, I want a rushing quarterback, and then I want to, if I can have 2 rushing quarterbacks, great, but at least want a QB2 with a safe upside in super flex. Moreover, but like even if it's in like 1 QB, it's the same thing. Like in 1 QB, I'm probably one of the first to take a QB because I would rather have the positional upside early on. Like, yeah, even in 1 QB, I'd just rather have Josh Allen. I'd rather have Lamar Jackson. I would rather, like, yeah, Kirk Cousins is fine in 1 QB, but you know what's great? 38 points. That's just the way I work. I don't know. But we won't spend any more time on this tier because we are finally going to get into the more interesting stuff into tier 4, where we have Saquon at the top, Jonathon Brooks. So it is Jonathan with an O. Thank you, Jeff. Kenneth Walker III, Rachaad White, Josh Jacobs, Trey Benson, Isiah Pacheco, and Kyren Williams. I have kind of shifted, and I like older. I've started dating older running backs a little bit more, and it's more that if you're a safe older running back in a good offense, I don't mind just taking you to try to win. And I feel, and it's not just that, I feel like Saquon is safe enough to where he's going to hold trade value in season if my team, comes out and face plants the first 2 or 3 weeks. I could pivot pretty quick if I panic. Ryan, I know where Jeff is. Where are you at the now we're kind of in the old fuddy dud stage. I know we're going to talk about Josh Jacobs, but I want to get you I would get your opinion on Saquon first.
Yeah, Saquon, I struggle with Saquon in Dynasty. This is a player that has really, after his rookie season, has not given you that far above like a typical high-end RB2, low-end RB1 type of score throughout his entire career, other than his rookie season, right? Obviously, a lot of injuries have kind of played into that. I think Saquon Barkley is a player that will always have more name value than the production he's putting down for your fantasy team. So that's the type of running back that I tend to shy away from in dynasty startups, where if I'm drafting a running back, if I'm committing an early pick to the running back position, I want it to be because I think this guy can be one of the 1 or 2 or 3 running backs that like gets a season named after him, right? That is on like 75% plus of playoff rosters. Like you had to have him to win your fantasy league that year, whether it was redraft or dynasty, right? I don't think Saquon, even on the Eagles, really fits into that for me. Just I understand these are tired talking points, but they're true for a reason. Like the fewer checkdowns that are likely to be happening in the Eagles offense with the mobile Jalen Hurts, as well as all of the goal line touches that Jalen Hurts is absolutely going to vulture. I have trouble closing my eyes with Saquon Barkley and seeing how he gets into that top 3 seasonal running back tier for this year. I don't like him in redraft either, so that's definitely influencing this take some. So yeah, I just can't really get there with Barkley as kind of like the consensus dynasty RB7, RB8.
That makes a lot of sense. To me, I guess it's his floor is safe enough to justify the value, and his trade value is cheap enough to where I feel like he's attainable. And like, will I regret it? Maybe, probably. But I'm still probably going to make that move. Jeff, I know you're not drafting Saquon. You're probably like, would you trade for Saquon? Is there any scenario that would happen? Because like, I doubt you would get it for a second. I know you'd probably do it for a second, but would you pay a first?
I don't know. It'd have to be a very specific scenario, I think, for me to pay a first for Saquon Barkley. Like my home league, we base our draft pick based upon essentially best ball in the background, where it's potential points for, and I've gotten the 12th pick like the last 3 years running. So like if somebody from my home leagues out there right now, I would probably give you my first for Saquon Barkley just to kind of have an extra hammer on that roster, because I'm kind of feel like it's going to be the 112 anyways. But when I look at, I'm very in for a redraft, to be honest with you. I understand Ryan's point there. I think a lot of the goal line stuff with Jalen Hurts was because DeAndre Swift was getting tackled at the 1 yard line, and I don't think that Saquon Barkley is going to get tackled at the 1 yard line as often as DeAndre Swift was. Somehow DeAndre Swift got tackled at the 1 yard line literally every single. It was like there was a force field around the goal line for DeAndre Swift, and he was going to get tackled at the 1. I think Saquon gets that extra yard and gets touchdowns from more than 1 yard out is what my hope is there to kind of overcome that. But I think that he's got the best offensive line in his career, the best offensive structure in his career. unquestioned going to be the top back. And it's kind of one of those things that you talk about Jonathan Taylor. I mean, the schemes are very, very similar between what Jonathan Taylor's operating in and what Saquon Barkley's operating in. The only big difference is we've seen proof of concept on Jalen Hurts being that goal line vulture, whereas Anthony Richardson was injured last year and wasn't able to do that. So that's kind of where, if I'm in on Jonathan Taylor, I should be in on Saquon Barkley following similar logic. And I understand numbers haven't quite been there since Saquon was a rookie, but I mean, structure hasn't quite been there since Saquon was a rookie either. And so that's where those are some of my concerns being answered for the Eagles right now. If I'm out there in a league and I feel like I'm one running back away, that it's difficult to feel like you're one running back away, because I always feel like I would be two running backs away if I feel like I'm one running back away, because the way that running backs go down, if I'm feeling like I need to get that. Now, if we are later in the season, maybe, but at the same time, if you're later in the season, it's already hit. If if you're kind of buying in on Saquon Barkley, it's already hit there. And so that's where I think, and the other thing too that you run into quite a bit is the person holding Saquon Barkley at this point, especially at this point, if they haven't moved them. We talked about McCaffrey. If they didn't move him during the rookie draft, if they're still kind of holding him, they're thinking about the boom case as well. They're not wanting to sell Saquon Barkley off of concerns about goal line usage or passing game usage. They're thinking, well, he's on the Eagles and he's going to kick butt now. And so, like, I've been waiting for this. Now let's go. I've got Saquon. So like that's the price you're paying, I think, when it comes to trading and acquiring for Saquon Barkley right now. I mean, if it's around market and I'm feeling comfortable with the rest of my build, I would have that talk. But like I said, in redraft, I do believe in it, and especially a lot of people pass him in best ball, and I'm sitting there with a Tyreek Hill or somebody like that at the very top of even Christian McCaffrey, maybe even, or CeeDee Lamb, and looking at it and saying, well, I can get Saquon Barkley in round 2, or I can get the 18th best wide receiver. I'm gonna kind of throw my dice on Saquon Barkley at that point.
Yeah. And that, I would pay a first if I owned multiple firsts. And I know that's like a weird scenario, but to me, I feel like I'm a little bit more liquid. I'm a little bit more fluid if I retain a first. But if I only have my picks, or like just a bunch of seconds, then it's a lot harder to buy into the first round, and it kind of limits my movement. I don't think any of us have any strong opinions about Jonathon Brooks. Fly him as king. He's the only guy. Dave Canales, yada yada. Kenneth Walker. I don't like drafting Kenneth Walker at all, because I don't know what Seattle is as a backfield. We actually are going to talk about Kenneth Walker. Ryan, I don't know how you feel about Kenneth Walker, so help provide me clarity. Is he someone that you're drafting at cost? In best ball, I like him. I don't like building my dynasty teams around him. Honestly, in redraft, I would do it too, because like, to me, you're playing on boom bust, and that's kind of who he is as a player. But dynasty, that paying that long-term cost seems really risky.
Yeah, I like the player. I think he's good. He leads the league in total missed tackles forced since he was drafted. That's kind of cool. Against on plays with 7 or more men in the box, I think he's top 5 in missed tackles forced per touch. Like, Ken Walker's awesome. I'll give it that, but he's not someone I ever want in fantasy, really, in any format at his cost. I think this type of player is just kind of always destined to be overvalued in all formats, where, yeah, if he's going to top out at like a 4 or a 5% target share, then what are you doing for me in any type of PPR, whether, even if that is an underdog half PPR format, unless you are in a completely elite offense where you're monopolizing goal line work, which I guess he kind of did last year, to be fair. But there's that additional volatility with Ryan Grubb coming in, implementing an entirely new scheme. So maybe it's some more open running lanes. Maybe it's not as many stacked boxes. But yeah, I just see an offensive philosophy shift there that is probably shifting more away from rushing volume, especially. So yeah, I'm kind of good with Ken Walker. I think he's great, but I'm just not interested in drafting him.
Yep. And he's another one that I would almost rather trade for him if it was right than I would be being able to draft him. Like, that draft value is a bit high. Rachaad White, I think a lot of people think he's a value. Like, even with Bucky Irving, then I know what Rachaad White is as a player. And I'm willing to just take that really garbage inefficient volume at his cost. But the first piece I ever saw from you, you really had a good breakdown and a strong opinion on Josh Jacobs, especially at cost. I am, I guess, I have him 12, Jeff 13. You're the outlier at 18. That's not a lot, but within this tier, it kind of is, you know. So give us your opinion on Josh Jacobs, because I do believe you think he is a little bit higher. He's valued higher than what he's worth.
Yeah, so my Josh Jacobs take is kind of the inverse of my Devon Achane take, where yes, I understand he has been fed a lot of volume over the past couple of years. Normally, volume tends to indicate future volume in future seasons. Players that get fed are probably going to get more touches. But when it comes to a player like Jacobs, where he just had a bottom 5 season by efficiency against his volume over the past decade of any running back that averaged 15 or more weighted opportunities. It's just looking at the history of those players, most often they just decline in volume the following season because most of the time their team looks at them and says, I don't know if this guy can handle all of this, right? And that is kind of what happened with Jacobs, right? So sure, he goes to the Packers, which already changing teams for an aging running back is a negative indicator for their fantasy points in that year that they switch teams. And also, Matt LaFleur for years has been all about, we want to use multiple backs. We want to deploy a committee. It was amazing vibes on MarShawn Lloyd throughout the entire offseason. Just today, A.J. Dillon is getting talked up by the Packers beat. So I just look at this and I'm like, okay, sure. If Josh Jacobs was going to average 18 or 19 touches a game on the Packers, I'd rank him as my dynasty RB11 or whatever. But I just don't buy that at all this year. I think, yeah, maybe he's a 55% opportunity share type of player now. I buy that he's the starter. I buy that he gets the most touches. I buy that he is in there at the goal line. But I don't buy at all that he's anywhere near the type of 3-down workhorse that we have seen from him for most of his career. So for that reason, I just can't rank him that highly in Dynasty, because I think the perception of Josh Jacobs is going to very quickly flip after this season, or even 6 weeks into this season.
So just to push back for you, push back, and to play devil's advocate, what does it mean to you that, yeah, he has a couple of bad indicators, but I do believe there are some good indicators when you're no longer a Raider? Specifically, you're no longer like I feel like that is like the ultimate one. And then two, I've kind of alluded to this about, in general, I draft offenses, and Matt LaFleur, I would say that he's a little bit more Sean McVay than he is Shanahan as far as he runs his offense. But regardless, that's a very good indicator for running backs. So do you think that, for at least for you, would those indicators like be a wash? Let's say he's got 2 bad dings, but like here's some good things, and like mainly that he's no longer being coached by Josh McDaniel. Does that do anything for you at all?
Yeah, I mean, look, I definitely buy that he's going to be more efficient. I think he's probably going to score some touchdowns this year. He can absolutely be like a mid-range or a high-end RB2 in fantasy football. But I just don't. So number one, you're Josh Jacobs, you're 26 years old. If you are posting a high-end RB2 season at 26 and roll over, you're 27. Okay, now dynasty managers don't want to touch you at all because they feel like you don't have like the Christian McCaffrey upside, and now you're old. And two, I just don't buy, like, I think it's fine to say, look, Sean McVay likes utilizing bell cows. We've seen this multiple times through multiple different iterations of his roster with multiple players, right? I don't think we would go, Sean McVay likes utilizing bell cows and he's good for running backs, therefore Matt LaFleur is going to do the same thing, when he has given all of this goal line work to AJ freaking Dillon for years in his tenure and has made us so frustrated. Anyone that's had Aaron Jones on any fantasy team over the last 3 years has been so mad at Matt LaFleur just in terms of his utilization. yeah, I think he designs a good running game. I think that this team, from a real life perspective, will do well, but I just don't think the volume is going to be there for Josh Jacobs to really be that fantasy difference maker. And again, kind of just a philosophical thing. I only want to draft running backs with premium picks with real dynasty draft capital if I think they can be like a top 5 difference maker type of running back. That's always what I'm looking for.
I'm not going to argue with you too much. And just for clarity, I meant in scheme, not in like usage, because I'm a huge MarShawn Lloyd fan, because like I said, like this is going to be closer to a 60-40 or 55-45 backfield than it is Josh Jacobs getting 30 touches a game. So like that's what I meant. Like I meant real X's and O's, and not as far as like who's going to carry the rock the most. Jeff, do you have any strong Josh Jacobs opinions?
Well, I know the history of LaFleur and the way that he's used backs traditionally. I think last year was a change. Like he kind of had a different approach last year than he's had in any previous season, where they did kind of have a little bit more of a feature back type role. And the way that I do, so I did my projections for the Packers, and usually the way that I do projections is like I'll try to go game by game and separate out who was injured and kind of who was the nominal running back 1 in an attack, or the running back 2 given injuries or whatnot, and then how did that shake out at the end of the year? And the way that I came up with the Packers, their running back 1 week to week, because Aaron Jones missed some time, had 318 rushes last year, and that's a lot of rushes. And so that was in the running back 2 had 107. The way that I kind of worked that math out, and that's a big departure from what we've seen traditionally from him having more of that split attack. And so that's where I'm a little bit more bullish on Jacobs being that back that does get that. Now, the addition of MarShawn Lloyd, I think, throws a complicating factor in it. But even more complicating than that is LaFleur had some comments that they thought Aaron Jones was going to be on the team, and they thought it was going to be Josh Jacobs and Aaron Jones in the backfield. And so that's where that kind of separating that, looking at that as saying, well, we want to have 2 backs, and we kind of think A.J. Dillon's bad, and that's why we brought Josh Jacobs in, so that we could have him and Aaron Jones to have the 2 backs. But now we don't have Aaron Jones. We did draft MarShawn Lloyd, and hopefully he's good, but we haven't seen him be good yet. And so I think that there's a path to that bell cow type usage for Jacobs. Do I think that it will really play that way given the history? I'm a little bit more iffy there, but I do think there is a very real path to Jacobs realizing that value, and that would be tremendously valuable should he kind of have that role in what we think is going to be a very high-end Packers offense.
Yeah, and it's the AJ Dillon thing. It's hard for me to buy, man. I've like is this a year 5 breakout? All of a sudden, it's like like he's got it together. I don't believe it. If anything, I'm just like, wow. So the Packers defense must still suck if he's looked good in camp. If something,
Well,
that's
it's probably the
only
second
thing.
team Packers defense, the way that they run quite a bit. Is that
Exactly. It's just like, oh, okay. Like I don't believe you. Like like I'm not like AJ Dillon is still like unrosterable in my opinion. Like he's just going to be roster fodder. You can't really drop him because he's a Packers backup, and you can't really uh, ever start him or feel good about it. The next 2 guys that I actually wanted to focus on, I'm the outlier on. Isiah Pacheco. What up, guys? I don't know. Like I just I don't get it. I feel like the Chiefs have done everything in their power to try to replace him. I know they love him, and by replace him, I mean we're going to see even less volume that we saw last year. I think Isiah Pacheco's allure is that he is a Chief. Ryan, am I crazy for this thought?
I mean, kind of. I think so. Yeah. So what have they done to replace him this offseason? They brought in a rugby player. Like we're
yes.
losing our minds over Deneric Prince being the second string running back right now.
Brought back Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Yeah, I think that tells you right there that they've done absolutely nothing to replace him. And
but Isiah Pacheco's a 7th round pick as well, is what I'm saying. It's just like I don't think like running back just doesn't matter to them in general. And that's why I don't think Pacheco matters. Does that mean like you're right, none of these guys matter. But like you guys are holding him up like Isiah Pacheco is going to be the guy for a long time, and I just don't believe that. Is what I'm saying. But anyway, I'm sorry to cut you off. I got a little hot for a second.
No, you're good. So, but no, that brings up kind of my point is at this point, after those top couple tiers of running backs, I view all of these guys as mostly year-to-year bets. So that's part of what's pushing Pacheco up for me is I think he projects really well this season. And the reason I think that is not only did they not try to replace him, they didn't try to replace Jerick McKinnon. And without Jerick McKinnon last year, Isiah Pacheco was, I believe, the RB4 by fantasy points per game. After week 10, only Kyren Williams had more fantasy points in the red zone than Isiah Pacheco did. He had a genuine three down every down every down bell cow role last year once McKinnon was gone. And he had one of the most valuable red zone roles in the league, which we can expect to continue. Yes, I'd expect this Chiefs offense to be a little bit more successful through the air than it was last year. Maybe Mahomes doesn't need to check down or throw as many screens and all of that. So sure, understood. But Pacheco, where he's going right now, both in redraft and dynasty, I think leaves a lot of room for upside just this season. And yeah, at this point, that's what I'm looking for in ranking a dynasty running back, because I only care about really this year. If he does well this year, his value will hold for next year. That's kind of all I need. And that's really my only test in terms of, am I worried about this running back's dynasty value insulation? Because most of them don't actually have any real value insulation after one bad season.
Yeah, if he returns a top 5 running back season in a Patrick Mahomes offense and they don't add anybody meaningful, he's going to be a first round redraft pick next year. And like people are going to lose their mind over Pacheco. And so that's where I am on that. And I hear you, Jag, but I'd say they valued running back at one point because they used a first round pick on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And
that was making Mahomes happy. That was just a bad.
I don't know. I don't think that they've meaningfully addressed the position at all. I think that they probably could have gone out on the free agent market had they been very concerned about Pacheco and probably gotten somebody that was at least a Zach Moss level decent that would have agreed to come and play in Kansas City for a year and kind of build their value. And they didn't bother doing that. And I understand not valuing the position, but at the same time, like they do recognize that they need at least a body back there, and I think Pacheco's been more than that for them, unless Kadarius Toney is the Jerick McKinnon and kind of steals all that passing down work. I think it's a real possibility that's the case.
I think Kadarius Toney's in his Cordero Patterson era. You know, it's it's the natural evolution.
It's just Jerick McKinnon. It's just so easy. We don't need to call him Cordero Patterson. He's like Cordero Patterson's got 50 pounds on the dude.
No, if Kadarius Toney is how Isiah Pacheco fails, I can live with myself on that take. I think if that is what has to happen for him to fail, I'm good.
Well, to me, it's his cost. Is that I think that Isiah Pacheco is a low end RB2 that's going to have some spike weeks, and I think it's more that like at cost, I would rather have almost every running back in tier 5, the tier after this. I'm easily one of the biggest Kyren Williams haters out there, and I'd rather have Kyren Williams at cost. But that's a whole other conversation that I guess I'm ready to pivot to, because I'm not going to convince either of you. Because like I hear all this stuff about Cam, everyone's like, "Well, Sean McVay said this." Sean McVay is the most excitable person on the planet. Every Sean McVay interview, unless he like just lost a Super Bowl or had a bad season because he drafted Tutu Atwell too high, like he's happy. He's a human puppy. Like he's always just like, oh man, I would, if Kyren Williams had kids, I'd be his godfather. Blah blah blah. I would let him raise my kids. He's just super happy. So I just don't buy it. You spent that much on Blake Corum, and his volume. You want to talk about being like a stat bro? His volume again is like way up there. It's kind of like what we said about Etienne, where like I do think Etienne might take a step back in volume, but even with that being said, I think he's a good enough player. I'd rather have him. I'd still have him. I think that Kyren Williams is going to take a step back in volume, and he's not Etienne as a player, so that's going to affect him. With that rant being finished, Jeff, we'll start with you. on there. You're still a believer on there. I guess I'm never going to convert you. Like, how many weeks have we had this show and you're still a believer? So it's just,
Still a
we're
believer in
staunchly,
Kyren?
yeah.
I don't know that
Do
I
you
would
not?
classify myself as the where
You
I
have
am
him
concerned.
ranked 12. That's a
So here's
believer
the
in my
problem.
book.
Here's the problem. Either Kyren Williams is the most undervalued fantasy asset right now because he was running back 2 last year, and if that holds, he is the most undervalued player in all of fantasy football. Or you better be leaving you better be leaving every draft with Blake Corum, because that's kind of where I stand on that. Because if you're placing that bet that Kyren Williams isn't that guy, then you better get Blake Corum at cost on every single roster that you put together, because that's the bet that you're placing. Whereas, in a third round value in redraft for Kyren Williams, when early returns, I saw Jordan Rodriguez talking about in early camp that Kyren Williams it's still Kyren Williams' team. Like, he's the guy. He's Sean McVay's guy. And if that's the case, then yes, whoever is holding Kyren Williams in your league is going to be very, very good. And that's going to be difficult to topple that. And I've struggled myself, like, it, because I'm sitting there like I'm in best ball mind right now, and I'm seeing in the third round Kyren Williams is sitting there and Derrick Henry sitting right there, and in redraft formats, Derrick Henry sitting in a fun new Ravens offense. I feel more comfortable pushing that button on Derrick Henry right now in a redraft format than Kyren Williams. But at the same time, I'm telling myself Kyren Williams is probably the player that I'm most wrong on.
Interesting. Ryan, your thoughts?
Yeah, is this a safe space? Am I allowed to admit that I've drafted some third round Kyren Williams here?
That's great.
I feel
very
like
happy for you.
That's like I feel like that's the take this offseason, where if you give it, everyone kind of looks at you and points, and it's like, oh, that's the mark. That's the guy that doesn't know anything. Like, LOL. He doesn't know that Blake Corum is gonna come take Kyren Williams' job. But look, Sean McVay's obsession when it comes to running backs is he wants one guy that he does not ever have to sub out on a drive, because he does not want to tip the play, right? He wants one guy to play all 3 downs, can do absolutely everything in every situation, so that he doesn't have to deal with subbing guys in and out. You could see him absolutely lose his mind last year when Kyren Williams missed a few games. He signed Darrell freaking Henderson off the street because none of the other guys in that backfield could do that. And I think that's what the Blake Corum pick was about more than anything. I think that Blake Corum definitely profiles that way. He is the type of running back that can do pretty much everything on the field, like at or slightly above a replacement level, right? Like, or pretty good, we'll even say. We'll be kind, right? So I think that makes sense that Corum is the type of player that McVay would want as depth. Maybe he rotates in like every third drive, every fourth drive or something like that, and Kyren Williams goes from being the RB2 in volume to like the RB5 in volume. I think I'm okay with that, because there's also the scenario where Blake Corum either pulls a Tanks Bigsby, or McVay, the most fickle coach known to man with running backs, decides that Corum does something in training camp that he doesn't like, and it goes from Sean McVay posting the quote about, oh my God, Cam Akers is going to be the absolute engine of our offense. He's going to be such a huge part of what we do. You can roll all those clips from literally this time last year to when Akers like missed a blocking assignment or something, and he's cut and he's on the street within 3 weeks. So I'm not saying that Blake Corum's going to get cut in week 3 or whatever, but I think it's very possible that Kyren Williams just continues to get top 5 running back volume. This is a team that seems to value running back more than most teams in the league. I believe they've drafted a running back literally every single year since McVay took over, including when Todd Gurley was there. It's just what they do, kind of like the Packers. They like to churn through these running backs. They don't care all that much about the draft cost or what the consensus big boards or the trade value charts say. And like, I don't think that enters their mind. I think we saw a need here at RB2 to have a guy who can step in and make sure the offense continues to function at a baseline if Kyren Williams gets hurt. So that's my Kyren Williams take. And therefore, yeah, I'm a bit higher than consensus in Dynasty. I understand he's like a structurally scary pick. I get not wanting to make that pick on a Dynasty roster for sure. But yeah, I think it's irresponsible not to mix him in, at least in like these best ball leagues where you can get him in the third round.
How much of that fear that you talk about do you think is attributed to the Cam Akers getting the rug pulled out? Because I think that that's a ton of it. That people are thinking last year, they were thinking Akers is a smash in round 6, and he is going to be. Did you see what he did at the end of the year? And then that rug got pulled out, and so they immediately ripped the rug out for Kyren. And I think you're exactly right. I think you make great points there. That it had a lot more to do with Ronnie Rivers being penciled in as the RB2 than it did about Kyren Williams.
Yeah, no, I think that's a lot of it. Yeah, is the Cam Akers PTSD. Absolutely, just to answer that.
I think Kyren Williams is a 50-50 player because I hear what you're saying about McVay and volume. But yeah, it is. But you're right with Akers that, where you get the rug ripped out from underneath him. That's exactly it. I am not willing to pay that price for what I think is a 50-50 player. I won't do it. I won't trade for it. Like RB2, low RB2, I'll do that. And with that being said, on the flip side, I will smash Blake Corum at cost every time because it's not even just like you said that if he's the RB2 that he's just going to be, the water boy until Kyren Williams gets hurt. But if he does get hurt, then I have an instant RB1. And that's not, especially in Corum's range, we don't really have that penciled in for many guys at cost. So yeah, I guess I'm the crazy one. So we'll move on to tier 5 here. And then we start with Rhamondre Stevenson. And this is why I thought y'all are crazy. There's no way I'm not taking Rhamondre Stevenson. There's no way I'm taking Isiah Pacheco over Rhamondre Stevenson. There's just it's that easy for me. I think regardless of what you think with the Patriots, this is another case of last season was such an outlier. They had a defensive coordinator and half an offensive coordinator sharing one role, trying to run an offense. It was incredibly bad. So like the Zeke stuff, whatever, it doesn't matter. I get that Antonio Gibson's there, but I will buy into Alex Van Pelt's offense and what he does for running backs. So that's why I like him. And I didn't even want to talk about him, but I didn't know that you guys were that bullish on Isiah Pacheco. So that's just so like Jeff, why Pacheco over Stevenson? Is it just because he's in a better offense, or do you think, or does like player safety not matter?
Well, offenses that score touchdown, good. Offenses that don't score touchdown, bad.
I'm just saying that it's not the same offense. It's like a whole new team, essentially.
Sure, but I still don't think they're going to score any touchdowns. No, okay. I get it. I get the argument, and I think that he's going to eat a ton of volume. I see that, and I think you're exactly right on the Van Pelt offense on catering to running backs, and he's set up very, very well. I mean, I am concerned about what the Patriots offense looks like relative to, I mean, you can't even compare him to the Chiefs offense. Like that's like night and day difference. I just think I think Rhamondre, really, when I look at it, I think he can scrape being a RB1. I think Pacheco can be a top 5 running back. And I think that those are two like just different planes of where you can end up.
That's fair. But we'll go to the players I actually want to talk about. DeAndre Swift, Heath, are you one like? I'm imagining that you think a lot like Paul, so you hate Swift. So let's tell the crowd why you hate Swift.
So I have quite the history with DeAndre Swift as a player because he's someone that yeah, that's true. That of any player in fantasy football, DeAndre Swift probably would. If I had to say, I bet your feelings have been hurt at some point. Probably DeAndre Swift. So yeah, my Fifis have been hurt by DeAndre Swift just like anybody. He is. I acknowledge he's a limited player. I like what he does with the ball in his hands. It's fun to watch. All of that. Clear it out of the way. I'm just not interested in a running back on. I guess it's technically his second contract. Running back on his second contract in a situation where he's likely splitting work. That's just not the archetype of player on a new team that I'm just that interested in. Yeah, I'm very underwhelmed by the idea of DeAndre Swift this year, where I think Khalil Herbert is a better runner of the football than him, kind of full stop. Khalil Herbert, extremely underrated player. Roschon Johnson, very likely to squeeze him in the third down situations, long down and distances. So it's just kind of where am I getting excited about the DeAndre Swift role this year? And I'm not at all. And yeah, then again, he's on his second contract, is just trending down as he ages, as any dynasty running back does. So I just see no reason to kind of jump on the train.
I guess for me, this range with tier 5 naturally is like the guys who are going to be splitting carries. So it's like the high upside part-time guys. And that's why I like Swift, is I think that he's high upside. And a lot of people bring up like Khalil Herbert. I agree with. I think Khalil Herbert's going to get his. I don't believe in Roschon Johnson. I don't believe in him. Everything that he was supposed to be good at. I watched every Bears game. All the things that Roschon Johnson was supposed to be good at. He just wasn't. I watched him specifically be the problem in that Bears offense, like not Fields that everyone hated. Roschon Johnson, I watched him be the problem in pass protection, multiple plays. I'm not saying DeAndre Swift is, Michael Orr. He's not the blind side or anything of like running backs or something like that, but I do think that in third down, especially with Shane Waldron's offense, like why not have someone that can catch passes and be explosive? If you don't have anyone that's like a great pass blocker anyway, because Khalil Herbert can't pass block. Khalil Herbert's terrible on third down. He's a great runner, because that's the thing is like Khalil Herbert is half a good running back. Like that dude can run with the best of them, but can't pass block, and he really can't catch outside of the line of scrimmage. Jeff, I know you're kind of in the same boat as Ryan as far as volume, right?
Well, DeAndre Swift, the idea of DeAndre Swift is better than the reality of DeAndre Swift. Like when it comes, I feel like DeAndre Swift has forever been frozen as this like young running back with so much explosive upside, and he's already going to be 26 and he's never really reached any sort of upside. And like you had a lot of these people that made portions of their personality DeAndre Swift in the fantasy community. And I think those types of things, your people. Yeah, it's just I get it. Like I get why people were excited for him like 4 years ago, but I mean, you couldn't have gotten better than his situation last year in Philadelphia, I feel like, and you still ended up with like a back end RB2. Like what are you ending up with there? And so, I mean, you look at Miles Sanders. Look what Miles Sanders did in Philadelphia compared to he's unusable. He's the worst contract in the league in Carolina versus what he was able to do. He earned the worst contract in the league in Philadelphia, and DeAndre Swift just wasn't even that, it felt like, for most of his time in Philadelphia. So that's where I look at the Chicago offense. I think there's upside there. I'm certainly I'm willing to bet on Swift in redrafts. I've drafted him in some places. I think there can be upside. I'm a little bit hesitant that I think Herbert's fine, especially when it comes to being a true running back. I think that offense wants a little bit more out of the position than what Herbert has traditionally been able to give them, and Swift is their path to that. But I do kind of think that they really wanted Saquon Barkley, and then Swift was there. It's kind of, if you watch the Hard Knocks episode with the Giants, where they were kind of like all in on one path on trying to get somebody. And then when they basically got to the point with Brian Burns where they said, well, if we don't get him, who's left? And I think that the Bears were all there with Saquon Barkley, didn't get him, and said, well, let's call DeAndre Swift really quickly. And so I think that kind of happened.
Next player is interesting. And I'm having to like reevaluate my rankings, because like I thought I was like as high as the Tyjae Spears guy as they come, but I'm not. I have him at 27, Ryan 17, Jeff 18. Where did I go wrong here? Because like I feel like I agree with you, but like I found it hard to put other people that I knew would have guaranteed volume, because Tyjae Spears is in that range where he has to average like 10 to 12 points a game or higher and have a few pop gains to be justified at his price, or he's going to plummet. He's kind of like, he can't have like a Jaylen Warren season at where we're buying him right now. So, Jeff, where are you with Tyjae? Or I guess like, where am I wrong for you wanting to have him so high in comparison to other guys? Is it just the age, or are you like that low on Tony Pollard?
Well, I mean, you've got Pollard ranked above Tyjae Spears in Dynasty. I think that's an interesting play there. Are you just betting that Tony Pollard's much better than Tyjae Spears?
This is why I said is that it's not about better. I just think that Tony Pollard's going to have a clear role and they're both going to split. He played a lot of last season hurt when he was clearly better. He looks better. So it's more that I'm willing to play the crypto game in Dynasty a little bit better, more with my running backs than other people are to win now. If the price is right, like Tony Pollard, the price is right where I'm willing to trade for him. Because if anything, I think my rankings reflect trade value a little bit more than they do to my actual draft value. Because like, would I draft Tony Pollard? Probably not. That's not how I build my teams to start. But I think Tony Pollard is worth more and guaranteed a little bit more volume and a role long term. That's just me, and that's like it's the same tier. I think it's kind of splitting hairs there.
Yeah, and I guess I build mine based upon who I would take in a startup usually, and so maybe we just have some fundamental differences on how we build ranks there. But I think that one of the things that we've been conditioned to believe about NFL backfields is that teams, if they're going to have two running backs, they want a thunder and they want a lightning and they want a different look. And I think that especially this past off season, there was a shift towards, a lot of what we talked about with the Rams, where I don't think they want to give away what they're going to do with the backs. And so when I look at that Titans move, I think there was some confusion because people said, well, they've already got Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard. What's going on here? But they want to be able to keep that guy in there and be able to play them on all three downs is my expectation. And I think that I don't know how it's going to shake out in terms of volume, but I do know that Tyjae Spears is younger than him. And I do know that his receiving profile as a rookie was literally one of the best of all time. So I think he's already shown that ability. I mean, obviously it's a new coaching staff, so that's going to be a question there. I think that there's a path where I guess maybe I feel a little bit better that Tyjae Spears can pull forward and be that lead back there. But I think that overall, the offense is going to be set up to allow these guys both to excel. And especially when it comes to the passing game, they're going to try to make life as easy as they can for Will Levis. And so I think I look at some of the other backs in a similar range that I don't think are going to be that involved in the passing game. Like I'm really concerned about Najee Harris in terms of, if they didn't throw the ball to Bijan Robinson, are they going to throw the ball to Najee Harris? Like with Arthur Smith, I don't think so. And I think the other thing with like a guy like Najee Harris is I do think that Cordero Patterson is going to have some level of a role. And so that's where I think there's paths to collapsing that value on a player like Najee relative to Tyjae Spears. And I think that unless like Tyjae Spears just falls off a cliff, even if he does what he did last year, he's still going to have some good level of insulated dynasty value.
Yeah, and it's like they're two apart, and this is kind of what I said at the beginning of the show. Towards the back end, if someone's ranked ahead, it's like baby things, and it's even like this is what it is right now. Ask me tomorrow, and I might like swap a few guys around, type thing, so I don't have any strong opinions. And like I said, this range, with the exception of Derrick Henry. All these guys are in similar situations. Like I love David Montgomery, and it's because I know exactly what he is. I know what he is as a player. I know his role. I know that as long as he's healthy, like he's going to give me around 13, 14 points a game with them pop games because of touchdowns. And I'm willing to draft that. I Najee Harris, I'm not too concerned because Bijan still did get some passes. And again, Desmond Ridder made a lot of that offense outliers. Like we just didn't get enough of anything because they couldn't sustain a drive. And also I think that the Steelers, if you want to like put people in boxes, I think Najee Harris is a higher end Tyler Algier, with Jaylen Warren being like the lower end Bijan in that scenario. Take that with what you will. To move on to Derrick Henry, I've kind of already told Jeff this. Heath, I'm just willing to ride the wheels off with Derrick Henry, and I'm willing to draft him at cost with it, and that's why I'm higher than most. He's hard. He's a player that's hard to argue with about because his life is an outlier. So where are you at with Derrick Henry? Like I get it, he's probably hard to draft. Will you trade for him?
So yeah, I always have to preface anytime I talk about Derrick Henry is like, I get it with Derrick Henry. I understand he's the second most dynamic, most efficient running back of this generation behind only Christian McCaffrey. He's so far kind of defied Father Time for even longer. I totally get it. Yes, the goal line work is potentially incredible in Baltimore. The offensive line play is potentially a whole lot better than it was in Tennessee last year. Like, I get all of it, but I'll start my take with he's the RB7 or the RB8 in redraft right now. I'm absolutely not doing that, not even considering that. Running backs of his age just do not produce RB7 or even really back end RB1 outcomes, even if you're controlling for guys that have had multiple RB1 fantasy seasons over their careers, right? So I can never get there with Henry in redraft, specifically in Dynasty, where all of that is kind of priced in. Yeah, sure, I can understand on certain teams. Will I sell like what I'm expecting to be a late second for Derrick Henry? Yeah, I can get myself there on certain teams later in the season if I know that this is actually going to make a difference in my win probability. Right now, as I said, I don't make win now moves in July ever. But yeah, I get it with Henry just in Dynasty because everyone else is kind of forced to reckon with. Yes, the music can kind of stop at any time with him, but any other format, I'm just not interested in Henry this year, and I'm fine if he burns me.
Yeah. The rest of this tier, like I said, Najee Harris, MarShawn Lloyd, Blake Corum. We kind of hit on all these players talking about their starters. So we'll just go ahead and jump into tier 6, our final tier. And again, like I kind of told you in like our group chat before the show, that when I redid my rankings, I moved a couple of older guys up. But I didn't have strong opinions until like this range, because this is where I shop for running backs most of the time. So like this is where I really kind of moved guys up, and then we got enough real. I wouldn't say the guys who get any type of camp buzz is good, meaning that they're not going to get cut and you're not dropping them off your taxi or something like that, like the Dylan Lauby, stuff like that. But with that being said, even within this tier, there's some interesting guys because like we have Alvin Kamara, who could be in the same conversation as Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, Tony Pollard, who I'm too high on, Jaylen Wright, Javonte Williams, Brian Robinson Jr., Aaron Jones, Zach Charbonnet, Zamir White, and Jaylen Warren. Alvin Kamara, we all kind of like him at cost. Redraft, I think he's my favorite running back because it's just like I know exactly what I'm going to get at cost. I will click the button on Alvin Kamara every time. I have so many best ball teams with Alvin Kamara RB1, and I'm just giggling, kicking my feet, clicking the button while I do it. And I know that Jeff's there. I'm assuming that you are from some of your comments, Ryan, right?
It's weird because with Kamara, kind of everything I just said about Henry applies, but with Kamara even more so. I right now am working on kind of a rewrite of my age curves article from last year, and one of the things I'm kind of adding in is looking at how missed tackles forced can be sort of a leading indicator of when a running back is going to fall off the age cliff. Alvin Kamara had a death knell level missed tackles forced per touch last year. And I completely agree. It is very hard to project anybody else for touches in the Saints backfield right now. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know that it's Kendre Miller or whatever, but I get the heebie-jeebies with Alvin Kamara in redraft. Again, in Dynasty, it's whatever. It's priced in. You can pay like your second round rookie pick or whatever to roll the dice on maybe he moonwalks into another 90, 100 targets this year and you're happy. But yeah, he's another one that I think is an avoid for me largely across most formats this year.
I don't believe in Kendre Miller at all.
So me neither. Just to be clear, do not believe in Kendre Miller.
Oh, okay. That's like that wasn't an endorsement. Good. Okay.
Yeah, no.
Jaylen Wright, Jeff, you are the highest on him at 20. I'm at 30. Ryan's at 33. I don't think you're crazy. Like I said, like we're like the further we get down, the blobbier the tiers get. So like 10 difference isn't as big as an outlier as it may look, but we make content. So I'm going to manufacture controversy. So Jeff, tell us why we should believe in Jaylen Wright and why he's probably the second biggest value in fantasy.
So I think I think that really what you come down the way I'm targeting running backs, especially in startups, is I'm looking for players like Wright that I'm going to get a discount built in on because he's not going to be an immediate producer maybe as a rookie unless somebody gets hurt. But so often you see these guys that are rookies that get drafted and year one there's a back there like Raheem Mostert, and then year two there's no back there, and all of a sudden the guy has jumped up like 6 rounds of value. And it's kind of like, well, like you knew that was going to happen if you look at the contracts and look at age. Like, why are you adjusting the value on that player just because it actually did happen, the thing that you knew was going to happen? And we've talked about that before on the show. When we had Leo on, we talked about how there's going to be a pop or a bump down when Keaton Mitchell is actually announced on the pup, and Keaton Mitchell is announced on the pup, and there was a bump down because that's just how people work sometimes. And really, when I'm digging into Dynasty, I'm trying to jump that curve, and I'll be aggressive on placing a player like Warren, who is in an offense that I really, really want parts of. He's a talent that I really believe in. I think he's got a path to either Monster or Achane missing time, and Warren's going to, or Wright's going to be the guy that steps in there. And so that's where I'm buying in on him. I think there's multiple paths to him realizing the value that maybe people don't realize potentially right now. And two, I think he's just going to be viewed much differently in the market next year because I believe in the talent and I believe in the structure. And I think it's a great opportunity for him.
And Ryan, you have him ranked 33 and as the lowest on him. I want you to tell Jeff why he's wrong. Fight to death over it.
I mean,
entertain the people who are still here in an hour and 15.
So now, I certainly get it with Jaylen Wright. Like this is pretty much the best player scheme fit of the entire draft. I would not argue against that. Yeah, I think if Jaylen Wright was going to succeed in the NFL, it probably would be on the Dolphins under McDaniel in this offense. That all of that makes sense to me for sure. I can't rank him as a top 20 dynasty running back. Like yes, I get it. It's dynasty. As you say, we want to try to project out what the contracts are going to look like, what it could look like a year from now. But also Jaylen Wright is a day 3 pick. He could not have a roster spot guaranteed a year from now, right? That should always be like our baseline with a day 3 pick. And it's hard for me to thread the needle on, okay, this is a day 3 pick who I am going to bet on value in year 2 that doesn't involve necessarily him getting on the field in year 1. That's just a really, really narrow path most of the time, I feel like.
Here's a caveat though. Technically, the Dolphins traded future day 2 draft capital to go back in the draft and pick him up. I'm just saying, like, it's like, I don't know if it matters.
I bet he didn't go 21 picks earlier, too, because he would have been a much better player had he gone 21 picks earlier.
Yeah. No, and I mean, fair enough. Yeah. I mean, certainly like running back draft capital has overall been deflating over the last 3 years. You could have called him a day 2 pick like 4 years ago, I guess, if that's the angle you want to take. I don't mean to like just belabor the point, oh, he's a day 3 pick, but yeah, I mean, this is not a player that has a guaranteed roster spot in year 2 or after year 2. That would be my only point. If he shows out and he steps in and he plays well, great, then sure. But I don't think organizationally he's really owed anything right now. So yeah, it's hard for me to build a case on him. I'm gonna rank him higher in Dynasty because of what I think it's gonna look like a year from now.
Yeah. Of course, Javonte Williams came back from the dead after being almost cut. No, I'm just kidding. Bijan Robinson Jr., I think he's another great value. Aaron Jones, I'm drafting. I'm not drafting Aaron Jones, but I can't not rank him outside of where I have him for the simple fact that he's a Viking. But to get to the juice, Zach Charbonnet, Jeff, you're the biggest believer in him. And I mean, I love Zach Charbonnet. I don't know where the Seahawks are at. So it's more like, is it more that you since you brought Kenneth Walker down, are you going to bring Charbonnet up, like kind of meet towards the middle?
Yeah, I think that that's the way to play it. You don't know how it's going to break out, and you know that these are both two reasonably young backs, and so it's kind of almost a discount version of the argument with Kyren Williams and Blake Corum, but with more uncertainty maybe on it. And I know that Ken Walker has done some phenomenal things when it comes to statistics, and I think there's metrics that certainly favor him, but you don't know what's going to happen when it comes to a new coach. And both of these players are incumbent players on there. And so that's where Charbonnet ends up being a player that I'll take a bet on, because it ends up being around round 11, 12, 13-ish where he sits in startup drafts. And that's usually where I start looking. I feel like my wide receivers are set, my quarterbacks are set, hopefully my tight end's set. And okay, now I'm going to start throwing darts on running backs that I think are going to pick up value at some point in the future.
And Ryan, it's kind of like this. Are you with me where you just don't know what the Seahawks are? And like, even with draft capital, it's like, what is he? Because like, I like drafting Charbonnet, but again, it's more about like where, I'm not trying to overdraft a backup guy after I already did it last year.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Some of it is like you could almost do the meme where it's like the ugly guy in the office that is like poking his head into the cubicle, and the ugly guy is Zach Charbonnet because we already did this with him last year, and then the attractive guy is Blake Corum, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm very interested in you potentially being a running back who could kind of in a volatile fashion take over more volume than we expect in this ambiguous backfield. So yeah, I buy it with Charbonnet. I think if you were making a Charbonnet to Corum comparison, then yeah, I think they're roughly equivalent talents. I just would be surprised if an NFL coach looks at what Walker provides above and beyond replacement, really on just mostly just on the ground, and is like, oh yeah, actually let's get Charbonnet in there over that. I don't know that Ryan Grubb wants to do like the Sean McVay thing where he just wants one running back the entire time. I think these guys will both kind of be cycled in. Walker, I would assume, holds on to goal line work. I guess maybe if I challenge myself on that assumption a little bit, I should pinch them in the rankings. But yeah, it's a little bit of a shrug of the shoulders to me, where I don't know that I don't see like the volatility here that I do with the Rams, where I can absolutely see either of them becoming like this workhorse. I don't think really either Walker or Charbonnet has that in the range of outcomes. I think pretty much any way you cut it, what one of them is at best in the 60 and the 60-40. So I just have trouble ranking them higher than I would like a Kyren Williams. I don't see like the world where I get excited there.
Noted. Well, guys, that does it. We have ranked running backs. When we get to Zach Charbonnet and get that deep into it, and we're now 22, thank you guys for being with us this long. I really want to talk about Dylan Laube, but we can't get into tier 9 yet. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. Do you got anything new coming up? You got anything new popping?
Pretty soon I am going to have my 2024 version of Age Curves out. You will be able to read that at some point before the season. That's all I'm promising for now. You'll be able to read that on fantasypoints.com. And then you can also follow me on Twitter at RyanJ_Heath to make sure you're not missing out on any of that.
Noted. Jeff, what do you got cooking over there?
I have a lot of articles that I'm writing right now about. Actually, I did dive into kind of exploring running back versus the zero RB landscape that we're operating in when it comes to ADP, and that's more of a redraft article. I think that it's interesting the way that it played out, and I'm working on a series of just kind of walking you through how to navigate 2024 redraft rankings. And so that's kind of where a lot of my focus has been. We have training camp reports coming up. I'm doing the Chargers and I'm doing the Falcons there. I am doing a side project that maybe will be published on Football Guys where I'm kind of explaining my projections. And so that's kind of turning into a thing. And then I have a Dynasty buys article for Dave that I'm working on. But no, I really wanted to thank Ryan, and we talked pre-show. Ryan and I ended up in a Scott Fish satellite in 2020. He was one of the very first people I met in the industry. He was very, very kind to me when I had 6 Twitter followers, I think, at the time. And so that was just really cool of Ryan. And so it's been really cool to see him come up the last couple of years. And it's really exciting to be able to do a show with him.
Yeah. And guys, I don't write. Actually, I am scheduled to write something soon, but I'm just here and I'm the handsome Chanel West Coast that just giggles and looks good. I'll see you guys on the next one. Keep trading, guys, and I will figure out how to close out a show eventually. See ya.